Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. Listener discretion is advised. After building a solid reputation as a b-boy with the legendary Rocksteady crew, he became a talented and skilled producer, working with the Atlanta legend and veteran producer Dallas Austin on timeless offerings from TLC, Madonna, Monica, Boyz II Men, and much more. My next guest's work can be heard on offerings from David Banner, Nappy Roots, Chameleonaire, Talib Kweli, Dead Prez, and of course, Saw Rock. His own album, God Complex, drops on September 30th, and I am excited to welcome Soul Messiah to the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Caught on the Mic. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot tell you how excited I am about this interview. I have been listening to his new album that drops September 30th for the past 2 weeks straight. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Soul Messiah. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, homie. How are you?
Good. So, God Complex, this has been a long time coming, right?
Yeah, it's been actually a very long time coming.
Right. I think we're going to get into that because if I understand correctly, the inception of the album started like as early as 1993.
Exactly. So you want a few people to get it right. It actually started then. I would start, stop, and then finally 30 years later basically said, you know what? Let's just do it. And now none of the songs, there are no songs from back then that are on this album, but just the concept of the producer DJ doing an album started back then when I was producing. So that's where that came from.
Let's kind of talk about your trajectory into that, because you started off as a b-boy, if I understand correctly.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come into that and find yourself on the path to being a DJ and producer? So
in the tradition of hip hop, when I was younger, everybody did something. And most of us did several parts of the culture. So the culture is 4 basic facets, which is MCing, DJing, graffiti, and b-boying. I did the DJ, graffiti, and b-boying. Some people did all 4, but my thing was that. My specialty was DJing and b-boying. I was pretty good with graffiti, but not like my partners. And so this is around 1982 for me. And then I'm a little older than I look, and put it to you like that. and then around 85, 86, I was always b-boying. I b-boyed up till my first child was born, 1995. But I was really serious about the DJing. I'm a technical cat, so I love technical things. So I was really into that. So around 1988, 89, I really got into making original, what we in hip hop we call original beats, with samples and adding sounds to them, right? But the breaking was paying the bills. I danced with a crew called the Rocksteady crew out of the Bronx, and I would travel back and forth from Atlanta to New York, working with Crazy Legs and the crew, and we travel around the world, and we would teach breaking and do demonstrations. So that was paying the bills, but I ended up hooking up with a cat named Dallas Austin, and Dallas Austin is a big R&B producer. And his team, his big brother actually, came to me and said, we need that hip hop edge that you do with the DJing and the cuts and the scratches and the samples and the drums. So I brought that into the camp, and got blessed to be able to work on a lot of big acts.
Yeah.
The acts. Michael Jackson, Madonna, Bjork. I got to do a lot of work with a lot of those acts, but my heart was always into the boom bap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So working with Dallas is what really got me into full-fledged doing production. Because when I had the first child, I couldn't travel like I wanted to. You know, they'd be like, we're going to Japan, we're going to Canada. And I'd be like, you know what? I just had a baby. I can't just run out on the lady and be like, I'll be back. So the production was more stable, so I could sit still at home and go to the studio and come back home. So this is pre-studios at home. We didn't have studios at home back then. We had to go to a studio.
For those that don't know, some of the legendary albums that you worked on Another Bad Creation, you worked with TLC, you worked with Boys to Men, you name it. And I got to tell you, I think a lot of those albums changed the way we see both R&B and hip hop music as it is today.
It did. Yes, it did. Because it was a traditional R&B lane, and then there was a traditional hip hop lane. But what me and Dallas and the crew did was we put scratches in songs. We put hip hop beats and drums and samples into R&B. Now, don't get it twisted. Teddy Riley did it first, right before us. But we bombarded the industry with cuts and like anything. I mean, from Monica, and she had Outkast on her album. People don't even remember, but we did it. We put it in everything. We worked on a lot. We worked on, what's her name? What's the lady name? Fleetwood Mac, the singer in Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, Stevie Nicks.
Stevie Nicks. We worked with Stevie Nicks.
Right.
You know what I mean? They want hip hop. You know what I mean? They want hip hop drums. They want that. And so, you know, we started to add that in, and it literally, you're right, it changed R&B. It changed it.
I don't think everybody has a full scope, or just, you know, your average Joe has the full scope of the elements that make up the culture. What were some defining moments for you and some inspirations for you, both musically and artistically and from the b-boy side of things?
Like, well, with b-boying, so I grew up doing it as a kid.
Right.
And my dream was, so I saw this movie called Wild Style in 82. I saw Flashdance, and they had these breakers in the street in Flashdance. And I was like, yo, as my cousin, you see these dudes breaking in the street? And we didn't know who they were. And then so from digging around, you got cousins. I was living in Atlanta at the time. I had cousins from New York, and they was like, that's the Rocksteady crew. So then you learn who the Rocksteady crew is. And then, of course, everybody wants to be in the Rocksteady crew or their rival crew, the New York City Breakers. So I was like, I'm going to be in the Rocksteady crew. And they were like, yeah, right. How are you? And what we called the country back then in Atlanta. We live in the country. How are you going to get with the Rocksteady crew? I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to do it. Right. And it was, you know, of course, no one believed it. I did. And one day, my brother came to me late 80s, and he worked in this spot downtown. And he said, yo, I met Mr. Wiggles from Rocksteady crew. I was like, no, you didn't. He said, yes, I did. And I told him that you would wreck him. I was like, wait, you told one of my idols that I would beat him in breaking? He was like, yeah, this is the phone number right here. This is the hotel they staying at. Gave me the phone number. And I was like, okay. So I called him. He said, come down here and meet me. Your brother told me that you would wreck me. So I went to meet him at his hotel downtown Atlanta. And he answered the door. Him and this guy named Quickstep, who was also in the Rocksteady crew at the time. Quickstep, they opened the door. And he's like, you know, peace. We met each other. It was cool. And they pushed the beds apart. Oops. They pushed the beds apart. And he's like, let's go. I said, go where? He's like, let's break. I was like, okay. So we got down. They had a little boom box and we danced. And it wasn't really a battle. They would just, I would go, they would go, I would go, they would go. And then they was like, you know what? Do me a favor. This is my phone number in New York. If you come in New York, hit me up. I want to introduce you to the crew. And you got to battle Crazy Legs if you want to get in the crew. I was like, what? First of all, I'm excited on one hand, and I'm terrified on the other hand, because it's Crazy Legs. Come to New York, battle Crazy Legs. I thought that's what we just did. So,
oh man.
Long story short, about maybe 6 months later, I end up in New York. I call them nervously. I called them, and they was like, meet us at this warehouse. So I'm like, it's nighttime. I was like, okay. I went to this warehouse down in Manhattan, and it was the wrap party for a movie, and there's all these movie stars in there. It was weird, and it was dope though. And it was the brother. I always get his name wrong. There was two brothers. They were actors, and one was a dancer and a singer. what is his name? I'm gonna get it in a minute. And when we met them, and then Crazy Legs and them were there, and he was like, "Yo, I heard you're breaking and you want to get in the crew." I was like, "Sure," but I didn't battle him there. He said, "Wait till tomorrow." And so after that party, we went to the studio, and I battled Crazy Legs. He wrecked me as usual, and he said, "You win."
Oh, wow.
Like, wow. So then from then on, they allowed me actually to take Rocksteady Crew out of New York and start my own chapter in Atlanta, and I did. And I started to travel around the world with them and train with them and did all types of stuff. And that was like dream come true. It was, and my friends at home, no one believed me because, it was pre-internet. So it was late 80s, early 90s. So I can't prove if I can get a picture taken and then let them see it, but no one will believe me. They just think I just be leaving town. I was leaving town. All right.
Well, something we both have in common is we're both a lot older than we look. And I think we can both count our blessings that there wasn't any internet in the late 80s, early 90s.
Exactly.
So we could just tell stories all day long.
Yep. Nobody can say anything and to know how we actually looked. Oh my God.
Right.
I looked a lot better then. I was a lot slimmer.
Same. So one of the things that I love about your music and your production style is it's really layered. So who are some of your influences musically that kind of lend to that?
Well, I'm from the South, as you know, in Atlanta. And one of the things a lot of people don't know is we are big on bands, marching bands, jazz bands, symphony. Those are one of the things that they made us do in the South in school systems. Everybody had to pick up an instrument and everybody had to be in some type of organization, and you either play ball or you in the band. I'm rather small and don't feel like getting beat up. So even with the football. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pick up these instruments. So I grew up dealing with music, right? So being in the band was a big influence on what I do now, if you listen to the sound. And my father was an avid collector of wax back then. It was only wax, 8 tracks and cassettes, but he was an avid collector. So, all the jazz, the soul, the rock, like I would just sit in the living room and look through his records and we would listen to records. So that soulful sound, Quincy Jones, Curtis Mayfield, and all the early greats, I was into that. I like soulful music. And so you'll hear a lot of, it's funny, they'd be like, you use soulful samples. Yeah, sometimes. A lot of it, though, is musicians. I have guys that I've played with since the early 90s, late 80s. Like, for instance, I got this cat that plays on all my music named Preston Crump. Preston Crump is a bass player. He's also the same guy that played on In Vogue, TLC, Boys II Men. He played on All Outkast. If you listen to All Outkast music, he's the bass player. And all my music since I've been doing production. And he's mad soulful. So he did Dr. Dre and Eminem, Forget About Dre. He did that. You know what I mean? Like he does all of these amazing big records. So I make sure that I keep that element in all my music. So the whole soulful 60s, 70s rock and R&B is my base. You know what I mean? So and I fit that around whatever MCs I'm working with. In particular, as of late, people know it's mainly Cyrock.
And your work with Cyrock is amazing.
Indeed. Thank you, brother.
I told you before we started recording this that I've been listening to the album for about 2 weeks now. I was in upstate New York last week working for the day job, had my AirPods in. I'm listening to God Complex start to finish over and over. And anytime somebody bothered me, I get so pissed off because I was so immersed into that music. And I'm glad you mentioned the Atlanta element of that because that is kind of indicative of a lot of artists from Atlanta. Does Atlanta get the love that it really deserves? Because I don't feel like it does.
They say that it's like the center of hip hop now, but normally it's not.
Right.
And unfortunately, the artists that are supposed to be the kings of hip hop, they're not really doing musical stuff though. They're just doing the kind of cookie cutter. I guess it's called trap. I don't know what they do now, what it's called, but it doesn't. Since 1992 or 3, R&B and hip hop has been the biggest thing in it. Well, in the world, it all came from Atlanta. I mean, any of these stuff that you record, people who are recorded, if they might have been from New York or LA, but they all came to Atlanta to record. You know what I mean? And or pick from the producers and artists and musicians here. And the writers, most of the writers are here. Or you know, because when LaFace Records came here about 91 or 92, Babyface and L.A. Reid, it really started to take over because that was Arista Records, Clive Davis, and he would frequently come down here. And people don't understand and know that a label like Arista would sign 1,000 artists a year. Do you know that? 1,000 artists, but you would only see 10.
Right.
But it was a lot of recording going on, a lot of music being made. So I think it's people know Atlanta, but you really have to, like, I give a lot of respect to some cats I came up with was Organized Noise. They're my age, and they really did do some really groundbreaking music with Outkast and Goody Mob.
You know, it's funny you touched on that point about Arista Records signing 1,000 artists and you'd only hear 10. One of the conversations that I have a lot of the time with my friends about the music industry, you know, they're quick to point the finger at the internet saying that internet killed the video star. Like if video killed the radio star, internet killed the video star, right?
Right.
But from my perception, it was always the labels over-signing talent that killed the industry. It was almost like they let themselves get too bloated, and instead of like really capitalizing on the talent pool that they had hoarded up.
And they just do it so you don't go nowhere else to do anything. And that made a lot of us discouraged. So people would get signed. They get a budget. They record an album, but they're never going to come out. So they're frustrated. They shelved, not shelved like sitting on the record shelf. They're shelved. So
Right.
you sign this contract, you got some money. And back then the money was totally different from now. It was a lot of money. And you never see them. Like to this day, I still wonder, where are them people? It was so many people.
Right.
Like tons and tons of artists, but you don't see them. And then, yeah, they were bloated.
Yeah, because you'd hear of whole albums getting recorded that never saw the light of day. And there were really interesting artists recording those albums, even as recent in the past 10 years.
Man, I had a group so dope named Jadis, Jatis.
Yeah.
I recorded them in 98. I didn't end up getting them a deal till about 2001, and it was on Loud Records. So Wu-Tang, Mobb Deep, Akon, you know, all of the big groups, David Banner, all of us around the same time. And Jadis was one of them. And they were what people would, if you heard them, you'd be like, Outkast Part 2. You know what I mean? In other words, another Atlanta group with good hip hop, soulful beats. And never saw the light of day. And because it was moving around. I think Loud shut down. We went over to Sony. I was at it's funny, the A&R for 50 Cent and Nas was my A&R for Jadis, but still never came out. You know, it just move you around. And then to shut you up, they would pay you. They'd be like, oh. And what you gonna do? Say no?
Right.
All right, give me the money.
Or they'd pacify you by putting you as a feature on somebody else's track.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I ended up moving that. One of the cats, he went over to Eminem, signed Eminem, Bobby Creekwater.
Wow.
And he was in Jadis, and that still never came out. You know what I mean? But it's a game, and you have to learn how to play the game. And like I always tell artists, learn facets, like learn to engineer, learn to master. If you're not rapping, learn to produce. If you're not producing, do management. Do whatever you got to do. Start a magazine. Back then, I'm old school. Mm-hmm. Start a magazine. Now it's a podcast. Do something so you're not stuck, but you still can add to the culture.
Yeah. I played in rock bands for probably 15, 20 years. And towards the end of it, I realized, man, I'm much better at the production part of it than I am at the performance side of it. And so exactly. that's where my heart was at. And so, you know, I found that my artistic sensibilities kind of dropped by the wayside.
Right.
Let's talk about artistic sensibilities in this album, this awesome album, God Complex, that drops on September 30th. As we said earlier in the podcast, this has been something you've conceptualized since as early as 1993, and it had a lot of stops and starts. Why now, and what is the concept of God Complex? Because it does feel like there's a connective tissue throughout the whole album. Am I missing something there?
No, you're right. Okay, so like you said, around 93, I was around. It was because I was with Dallas Austin. It was a group of producers, and so we would have people around us like. Oh, I'll give you a good example. Let me start here, and you keep me on track here. I remember we had an office downtown and a studio downtown. In the office, a young cat came around and he was like, "Yo, I'm trying to do this music like you guys do," and his name was Puffy at the time. Puffy said, "I'm trying to do this. I got artists." Right? He brought two dudes with him. He had this older dude who I knew he was Easy Rock. Craig Mack, and he said, "I got this other artist, this young cat," and it was this short, chunky dude, and it was Biggie before Biggie was big.
Right.
And he rapped. I remember Biggie rapped for us, and I was like, "Yo, this dude is pretty dope. This might go somewhere." And so he started bringing producers around because he saw that Dallas had a group of producers around him. In other words, he emulated a lot that he saw. He was a smart guy, by the way, Puffy. And so he started bring all these producers around. So all the producers ended up kind of linking up. So you had Dallas's crew, which is me and a couple other cats. You had I think they call them the Hitmen now. Puffy's crew, Hitmen. So all these producers, Diamond D was around. Eric Sermon was around. This guy named Wokey, who was BBD, New Edition's producers. All of us were around, and everybody was trying to put their bid in and do their thing. And that's how I started to decide that I'm going to do my producer album and I'm just going to get different artists. And I was start and stop. And like I said, life went on and I did a lot of things. We won't go through the catalog. I did a lot of things, but I ended up meeting and recording later in 2000s, recording Cyrock. So with Cyrock, I recorded 13 albums, literally. We released 13 albums, 12 before we met Rhymesayers. So I work with one artist, and I'm still going to work with forever. But I was like, you know what? I wanted to do something when I was younger, and I'm going to go on and do it. Now, I came up in the culture, so I ended up dealing with a lot of information. I still am. I'm into knowledge of self, right? So in other words, that's studying self. Know thyself, as they say in Kemet or Egypt. And a lot of people look outside. This deals with the concept of God complex. A lot of people look outside themselves for spirituality, look outside themselves for what would validate them or make them feel good. But we don't realize that what we call God, Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever it is in us, just like it's in the plants, right? And so the concept of God complex is what it sounds like and not what it sounds like. So a complex is something that you can have mentally, or a complex can be a physical being, an item, a building, whatever it is. So I look at it like the body, man's body, woman's body is a complex. And in that complex is the energy of what we call God, which is the all. So in that are all types of aspects, all types of feelings, emotions, anger, love, all that. So I said, you know what? This body of work, which will be in several installations, just the first, will be the crown chakra, the throat chakra, in the chest, down in the midsection, down the legs. It's a complex. And all of those aspects, different MCs will be able to express themselves through my complex, which is the God complex. And I just decided, man, I'm gonna start. Plus, I'm an empty nester now. That helps. A lot of people understand. I could have just started with that. My children have moved out, so now I can do what I want to do. But no, truly, I am an empty nester, and it allows me to be able to travel and tour with Cyrock and do all these different things. And the music is just a big part of it. Because I always DJ for her, behind her. But a lot of people don't know that I do all her music, right? So basically, that's what that is. The God complex, in a nutshell, is us, and everything that the world is made of is inside of us. And so you could say it's a complex. And then, I did use the word because it's going to pull people in. And even the picture on it, it's like, wait, are you a monk or are you Black Jesus? I'm like, I'm all of that. So whatever it is you take from it, wait till you hear this Planet Asia song by the Zion I song, this Cyrock lyric, you know what I mean? So it's just basically the culture all encapsulated in one.
Yes. And this week you dropped a new video with Evidence, which is probably one of my favorite songs from the album. Limitless, so good.
Indeed.
What was the concept behind the video?
So Limitless. It was Ev's idea to use, it's mad dark and it's a lot of lights, and he uses a lot of neon lights. But we shot through a puddle on the ground. We was on Venice Beach at night. He got a broke foot, by the way. So he out there with a broke foot, so he can't move much. He don't move much anyway. And he's like, see these puddles on the ground and the ripples in the water? He's like, that's limitless. And that's what I want to do for the video. So basically, they put the camera down into the water, to the puddle. And then we stood over the puddle. And so the reflection of it, and it will ripple. And the only reason the rippling happened because we made a mistake and kicked the puddle and it didn't ripple. And he was like, that's it. And it's a lot of reflection, a lot of a limitless imagery, as he put it.
I love that.
But, yeah, and it was he's a real conceptual dude, and he's laid back. What they call him, Mr. Slow Flow. He is literally that. So it was dope.
Yeah, for sure. And I tell you, like, there's something really special about what Saw Rock has been doing the past couple of years. Like, you almost feel like she's on the cusp of something, but you can't put your finger on it. You can't define exactly what it is. But, man, people are going to be putting some respect on her name really soon if they aren't already, right?
Yeah, she's it's funny you say that. You overstand where she is. She's one of those MCs where, in the tradition of, I call it true school, not old school. In the tradition of true school, our stars pre-2000s were what we call conscious artists, and that could have been a man, a woman, it didn't matter. Lauryn Hill is a perfect example of,
yes,
she was conscious, she was rhyming better than all the dudes, and she was singing. Yes. And Saw Rock is right there on the cusp, but people have to decide because, and I always tell her, I'd be like, I'm sorry. She'd be like, what do you mean? Excuse me. Men, we are bugged out to where we don't want to give props to women for doing what they do, and a lot of times better than what they do, because there's machismo, weird stuff that we have. You know what I mean? But soon, I think soon it'll break through. And, people be like, you've done 13 albums. The world thinks she's done one. So, you know what
exactly.
I mean?
Yeah, so, exactly.
So she's just getting started.
How did that working relationship with her start?
It's funny. We were friends, and then I was recording Nappy Roots. I was in the studio with Nappy Roots, so sometimes she would visit me in the studio. She was visiting me in the studio, and she made a joke one day. And she said, she didn't do music. She didn't do poetry. She didn't do none of that. She was in college. She said, I can rap. I can write a rap. And you'd be like, okay, yeah, whatever. So anyway, I'm working. She's like, no, seriously, I can write a rap. Give me one of them beat CDs. I was like, beat CD? And I was like, okay, I gave her a beat CD. And then she came back with a rhyme, and I said, spit it. And she spit it, and it was dope. And I was like, wait a minute, you wrote that? She was like, yeah. I said, go in the booth, and she spit it. And the funny part is, one of the early songs that she wrote is, we don't throw anything away with Sarah. I'm gonna put it to you like this: when we record, it's out. And she ended up nonstop. She found out she had a gift, and it was a joke. It was a joke. She just was like, I can do it, and she literally could do it. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't bother it. I don't try to tell her what to do with it because I feel like I'd mess it up. And now she's mastered it. I mean, she went from making a joke about rapping to doing a song with Black Thought, going toe to toe. Right.
Yeah, for sure. And your I almost said CD release party. That's dated. That tells everybody how old I am. But your album release party is September 28th at Aisle 5 in Atlanta, Georgia with Saw Rock. How excited are you for that?
I'm very excited because, like I said, it's a dream come true for me. So, I'm going to make everybody in Atlanta. They know I've been here. You got to come out. But, like I said, I told Slug from Atmosphere. He told me, actually. He told me one day, I said, y'all put out a lot of records. Every 6 months to a year, they dropping a record. He said, I'm 50. I'm going to put out a record to the day I leave. And I was like, me too. So this is just the beginning. This is my first album. And I'm going to I got instrumental albums out, but I'm going to keep doing it. And that's why I'm excited about this first one.
I can't wait for the rest of the world to hear it. Trust, man, I've kept it to myself, but whenever it drops, I won't be keeping it to myself anymore. And those of you that are listening to this podcast, there are 3 singles from God Complex available on all the streaming platforms right now. Soul Supreme, Rocksteady, and Limitless, featuring Evidence. All of these songs have great features on it. Excellent music. I cannot wait for everybody to hear the whole composite, man.
Yes, I appreciate you, man. I'm excited.
I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but thank you for your contribution to the culture, to our listening enjoyment. It didn't happen overnight, so thank you for everything that you've done so far, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you, and I plan on hopefully doing much more.
Yes, yes. So, final thought, right now, with everything we've been dealing with the past 2.5, 3 years, what is your advice for making the world a better place right now?
I always tell people, number one, treat each other good, no matter what. Life is shorter than we think. So if you got problems, you got something you're dealing with, if it's something that can be solved, let it go. Make sure you take care of your family, get some sleep, and eat right.
Yes, yes. Well, I got to tell you, Soul Messiah, if you ever find yourself in the backwoods of Lincoln, Nebraska, there's a seat at my table for you, my friend.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Great conversation. I can't say enough how privileged I feel I am to have had it. This is honestly one of my most favorite conversations I've had thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you give Rhymesayers Entertainment a follow on all forms of social media. Make sure you follow Soul Messiah on all forms of social media. And while you're getting generous with those social media follows, make sure you follow Caught on the Mic on all forms of social media. Visit me, www.caughtonthemic.com. Also, I appreciate those 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcast app, and give me a rating on Spotify as well. I would really appreciate that. This has been Caught on the Mic with Michael Clark. I'm Michael Clark. Until next time, thank you.